April 30th, 1943. Off the coast of Huelva, Spain, a lone fisherman in a small wooden boat notices something floating in the water. At first, he thinks it's just debris from the war, a barrel, a crate, another piece of wreckage. But as he gets closer, the shape becomes clearer. It's a man, face down, wearing a British officer's uniform. A leather briefcase is chained to his wrist. By noon that day, Spanish authorities will have the body. Within days, photographs of the documents inside that briefcase will be on Adolf Hitler's desk. The man in the water is about to change the course of World War II. The man whose name is on his papers never existed. The man whose body this really is died 2,000 kilometers away, alone, in a cold, empty building in London. His real name was Glyndwr Michael. He was born on January 4th, 1909, in a small Welsh mining town called Aberbargod in Monmouthshire. His father, Thomas Michael, worked in the coal mines like most men in the valley. The family was poor, but they had enough to survive. The rhythm of life followed the shifts of the mine and the whistles of the colliery. In 1925, everything collapsed. Thomas died, leaving the family without its only reliable source of income. Glyndwr stayed with his mother. He was physically weak, often ill, and struggled with mental health problems. In a region where survival meant hard physical labor, he was a poor fit. They moved from town to town across the valleys, Penygrig, Trehafod, Treorchy, chasing rumors of work that never materialized. The Great Depression hit Wales like a hammer. Mines closed. Entire communities went from low-paid labor to complete joblessness almost overnight. By the early 1930s, South Wales was a landscape of shuttered pits and hollow-eyed men. Unemployment queues stretched around corners. Families sold furniture, clothes, anything of value, just to eat. Respectable workers became beggars. Pride collapsed under the weight of hunger. For Glyndwr, there was nowhere to fall back to. He had no trade, no connections, no strong body to sell for labor. His mother kept him afloat as long as she could. But in 1940, she died. At around 30 years old, Glyndwr Michael was left with nothing. No home, no money, no family, no prospects. He did what thousands of desperate people did in those years. He went to London. London in the early 1940s was not a city of opportunity for men like Glyndwr. It was a city under bombardment. Sirens, searchlights, rationing, queues, rubble. And somewhere beneath all that, the quiet misery of those who had fallen out of the system entirely. Glyndwr drifted through the city, sleeping in shelters, doorways, derelict buildings. He was sick. He was hungry. He was mentally unstable. In a metropolis of millions, he was invisible. Throughout history, war often remembers the names of generals and politicians. It rarely remembers the man whose coat is too thin for winter, whose stomach is empty, whose mind is coming apart. Glyndwr Michael was one of those people. He was not a soldier. He was not a spy. He was not a hero. At least, not yet. On January 26, 1943, Glyndwr Michael was found in a disused warehouse near King's Cross Station. He was barely conscious. Around him, there were traces of rat poison, bait left to control vermin in the building. Whether he took it by accident, mistaking it for food, or swallowed it deliberately in despair, no one can say for certain. The official report listed poisoning by phosphorus, the active ingredient in the rat bait. 2 days later, on January 28, 1943, he died in St. Pancras Hospital. Age, 34. Cause, poisoning. Next of kin, none. His body was sent to the morgue. In the paperwork, he was just another anonymous casualty of poverty in wartime London. No relatives came to claim him. No one asked where he had gone. By all normal measures, Glyndwr Michael's story should have ended there. But the war was hungry for bodies. And somewhere else in London, a group of men were looking for exactly this: a dead man no one would miss. At that same moment, a very different problem was being argued over in London. By early 1943, the North African campaign was almost over. German and Italian forces were being pushed out of Tunisia. The next question for the Allies was simple to ask and terrifying to answer. Where do we strike next? Winston Churchill had a favorite phrase for the next step. He wanted to attack what he called the soft underbelly of Europe, through the Mediterranean. The most logical stepping stone was obvious: Sicily. And that was the problem. Sicily was so obvious that even Hitler could see it. If the Germans correctly guessed that the Allies were going to invade Sicily, they could flood the island with divisions, guns, tanks, and aircraft. The landings would become a slaughter. Churchill himself is reported to have said, "Everybody but a bloody fool would know that it's Sicily." So the Allies needed to do something extremely difficult. They needed to attack the most obvious target in the world and convince Hitler that they were going somewhere else. In a cramped London office, a Royal Air Force officer named Charles Cholmondeley and a Royal Navy intelligence officer and lawyer named Ewan Montagu were working on exactly this problem. Cholmondeley had been playing with an idea since 1942, under a project he nicknamed Trojan Horse. The basic concept was morbidly simple: find a dead body, dress it as a British officer, give it carefully forged documents suggesting a false invasion plan, let the body wash ashore where the Germans would be sure to find it. Montagu, assigned to the 20 Committee, the group that oversaw deception operations, saw the potential. He took Cholmondeley's half-crazy idea and began turning it into something far more sophisticated. On February 4, 1943, they formally presented their plan. Codename: Operation Mincemeat. The committee approved it. Now they needed three things: a body, a believable identity, and a place where the body could be accidentally discovered by exactly the right people. The body problem was solved sooner than anyone expected. Montagu turned to an old acquaintance, Bentley Purchase, the coroner for London. Purchase controlled access to the city's unclaimed dead. He was used to dealing with tragedy, but not with requests like this. When Montagu explained that he needed a body for a secret war operation, Purchase was horrified and intrigued. He warned Montagu that finding a suitable corpse, one that could plausibly have died in an air crash at sea, would not be easy. Then, in late January 1943, the body of Glyndwr Michael arrived on his table. He had died from ingesting rat poison. The damage to his internal organs could, in theory, be mistaken for injuries from drowning after a crash. If examined casually, and if the story around him was convincing enough. Most importantly, he had no living relatives. No one was looking for him. No one would complain if his body never appeared in a pauper's grave. Bentley Purchase contacted Montagu. He had found their man. The corpse of Glyndwr Michael was placed in cold storage. From that moment, he was no longer just a dead man from Wales. He was raw material. Over the next 3 months, Montagu and his team built a new life for him, detail by detail. They gave him a name: Captain, Acting Major, William Martin, Royal Marines. A rank chosen carefully, high enough to plausibly carry important documents, but not so high as to attract unrealistic attention. They created an identity card. They found a real photograph of a naval officer whose face roughly matched Glyndwr's build. They issued him a service number. Every piece of paper was aged, stained, folded exactly as a real officer's documents would be after months in pockets. But identity is not just official documents. It is the small, messy details of everyday life. Montague called it pocket litter. In Major Martin's pockets, they placed theater ticket stubs from London shows a bill for an engagement ring from a jeweler, a letter from his bank, warning him about being overdrawn, stern letters from a father staying at a Welsh hotel called the Black Lion, a faded photograph of a young woman in a bathing suit smiling at the camera, and, most importantly, love letters from that woman, Pam. To make this love story feel real, they needed a real woman. Her real name was Jean Leslie. She was 19 years old, working as a secretary for MI5. Montague persuaded her to help. Jean agreed to pose as Pam, Major Martin's fiancée. She let them take a photograph of her in a swimsuit on a riverbank, a daring image for the time. The kind of photograph a young man might carry in his wallet and show friends with a grin. She and Montague even wrote real letters back and forth, building a paper trail of their fictional relationship. She signed them as Pam. He signed as William. They went to clubs, cinemas, restaurants, always making sure to keep tickets and receipts that would later go into Martin's pockets. Montague went so far as to visit a real hotel called the Black Lion in Wales, registering under the name of Martin's father so that any German who checked the records later would find a genuine entry in the guest book. By April 1943, the life of Major William Martin was as real on paper as that of any living officer in the British Armed Forces. Now they needed the lie that would make Hitler move his troops. The heart of Operation Mincemeat was a letter. It was supposedly written by General Sir Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Harold Alexander, Commander of British forces in North Africa. The tone was informal, the language relaxed, the kind of letter that senior officers might exchange when they believed no one else would ever read it. In the letter, Nye mentioned Sicily, the obvious target, but only as something the Germans were expected to worry about. He then revealed the real plan. The main Allied invasion would hit Greece, with Sardinia also targeted. Sicily, the letter implied, would be used as a decoy. This was the genius of the deception. The letter admitted that Sicily was obvious, which made it sound honest. Then it wrapped that honesty inside a bigger lie. Another letter, from Admiral Louis Mountbatten to Admiral Andrew Cunningham, reinforced the same message, casually referring to operations in Greece and Sardinia as if they were already rolling forward in planning. All of this would be placed inside a locked briefcase, chained to Major Martin's wrist. By mid-April 1943, everything was ready. Glyndwr Michael's body, now dressed in full Royal Marines uniform with a life jacket, lay inside a special metal canister packed with dry ice to preserve him. The canister would be loaded onto a British submarine, HMS Seraph, under the command of Lieutenant Norman Jewell. The crew would be told that the canister contained a top-secret meteorological device. Only a handful of men knew the truth. Inside was a dead man who, if everything went according to plan, would convince Hitler to send entire divisions to the wrong place. The destination was chosen carefully, the coast of Spain, near the town of Huelva, officially neutral, unofficially full of German agents. In a few days, the submarine would surface in the darkness, the canister would be opened, and the body of Major William Martin would be committed to the sea with a brief prayer. The message sent to London afterward would be simple. Mincemeat complete. But for now, the canister sits on a quiet Scottish dock, waiting. Inside it, the body of a man nobody wanted is about to become the most important corpse of the war. April 30th, 1943. Just before dawn, the British submarine HMS Seraph lies on the surface of a calm sea off the coast of Spain. The crew has been told they are about to deploy a secret meteorological device. On the foredeck, a metal canister is opened. Cold vapor spills out. Inside, dressed in a Royal Marines uniform with a life jacket, lies the body of a man with a leather briefcase chained to his wrist. The captain, Lieutenant Norman Jewell, reads a short prayer. Then the body is slid gently into the dark water. Within a few hours, waves will carry it to the Spanish shore. Within a few weeks, this dead man's papers will move entire divisions across Europe. The message Jewell will radio back to Britain is simple: mincemeat complete. But for the operation to work, one thing has to happen. The Germans must believe every part of the lie. Before HMS Seraph ever left Scotland, every detail around the body was rehearsed. Glyndwr Michael's corpse was thawed just enough to dress him in the uniform of Captain, Acting Major, William Martin, Royal Marines. A life jacket, a Mae West, was placed on him to support the story that he had survived an aircraft ditching at sea, only to drown later. In his pockets and wallet, Montagu's team placed the pocket litter they had spent months assembling: identity card and Royal Marines paybook, theatre stubs from London, a stern letter from his bank about his overdraft, letters from his father at the Black Lion Hotel, a silver St. Christopher medallion, love letters from Pam, worn at the edges as if read many times, the photograph of Jean Leslie smiling on the riverbank. The briefcase was attached to his belt with a chain. Inside, the crucial letters from General Nye and Admiral Mountbatten, plus other routine-looking documents to make the packet feel real. Montagu had one more trick. He placed a single hair inside one of the sealed envelopes. If the envelope was opened and resealed, the hair would be gone. That way, the British would know whether the contents had really been read. On April 19, 1943, the canister containing the body was loaded aboard HMS Seraph at Holy Loch, Scotland. The crew were told nothing of its true contents, only that it was highly secret. For 11 days, the submarine sailed south through the Atlantic, then into the waters off Spain. Inside the canister, dry ice slowly evaporated, keeping the corpse cold enough to delay decomposition. When they reached the designated point off Huelva, Lieutenant Jewell gathered a small group of trusted men. Only then did he tell them the truth. Just before 4:30 a.m. on April 30th, they opened the canister on deck. The cold mist that poured out made the scene almost theatrical, as if the corpse itself were emerging from some other world. Jewell read the 39th Psalm over the body, a brief, solemn act of respect for a man who had never volunteered for this role. Then the corpse of Major William Martin was released into the sea. The tide would do the rest. Around 9:30 that same morning, near the beach of El Portil, a fisherman of Portuguese origin named José Antonio Rey spotted a body floating in the water. He hauled it aboard. The uniform, the life jacket, and especially the briefcase chained to the wrist told him this was not just another drowned sailor. He brought the body into the port of Huelva and reported it to the Spanish authorities. Spain was officially neutral. Unofficially, Huelva was crawling with German agents. To the British, this was exactly where they wanted the story to go. The Spanish authorities now had a delicate problem. On paper, they were neutral, obliged to return any British military property intact. In reality, General Franco's regime leaned heavily toward Germany. The local authorities knew that anything involving a dead British officer might be of interest to the Germans. In Huelva, There was one German the British particularly wanted to see involved: Adolf Klaus, a German agent, working under the cover of an agricultural engineer. He was quickly informed about the body and the briefcase. Before anything was officially returned to the British, Spanish officials did something they would later deny. They opened the briefcase. Carefully, slowly, they worked on the sealed letters, steaming or probing them open just enough to remove, read, and copy the contents, and then put them back. The hair Montagu had placed inside one of the envelopes quietly fell away. Copies of the documents were forwarded to the German embassy and then to Karl Erich Kuhlenthal, the senior Abwehr officer in Madrid. From there, they went straight to Berlin. The bait was in the water. Now the question was simple and terrifying. Would the Germans swallow it? On May 2nd, 1943, Major William Martin, Royal Marines, was buried in Huelva's Nuestra Señora Cemetery with full military honors. Spanish officers attended. The British vice consul arranged a wreath, supposedly from Pam, the fiancée who existed only on paper and in one photograph. The name Major William Martin would later appear in the Times in a list of officers killed, further cementing his reality in the public record. In London, Ewan Montagu and his team waited anxiously. They knew the body had been found. They knew the documents had been opened. The missing hair in the envelope proved that. But they did not yet know whether the Germans believed what they had read. The answer would come from an unexpected source. Not a spy, not a diplomat, but a group of people hidden away in a country house in Buckinghamshire, listening to other people's messages. At Bletchley Park, British codebreakers were reading a growing stream of German military signals. Every day, they decrypted orders, reports, and assessments from German commands across Europe. In mid-May 1943, something began to appear in those intercepts. Reports from German naval and army commands spoke of new Allied plans. They referred to reliable information, suggesting that the next Allied invasions would target Greece and Sardinia, with Sicily mentioned as a secondary, diversionary area. On May 14, 1943, Adolf Hitler held a conference with his senior commanders. He reviewed the documents brought to him from Spain. He declared that they were authentic. He told his generals that Greece, Sardinia, and Corsica must be defended at all costs. Sicily, he concluded, was not the main target. Soon afterward, Bletchley Park intercepted orders transferring the experienced 1st Panzer Division from France to Greece and multiple infantry divisions from Italy to the Balkans. Sardinia was reinforced with aircraft and naval units. Back in London, Montagu finally allowed himself to relax. The Germans had not only read the documents, they had believed them. Operation Mincemeat had been swallowed whole. In the weeks that followed, German troop movements told the story clearly. Divisions that could have strengthened Sicily were sent instead to Greece and Sardinia. Minefields were laid where no Allied soldier would ever land. Even when intelligence reports warned that Allied shipping was massing for an invasion in the central Mediterranean, Hitler remained convinced that Sicily was just a decoy. By early July 1943, while German commanders argued over where the next blow would fall, one thing was certain. The forces that should have been waiting on Sicily were hundreds of kilometers away, guarding against a phantom invasion that would never come. On the night of July 9, 1943, Allied troops began landing on the beaches of Sicily. 4 hours after the invasion started, German signals showed that aircraft were still being sent from Sicily to reinforce Sardinia. Even as Allied soldiers fought their way inland, Hitler and his high command were still bracing for an attack on the Balkans. One dead man in a borrowed uniform had outsmarted the German war machine. But the full consequences of that deception were only beginning to unfold. July 10, 1943. The Mediterranean is full of ships. 160,000 Allied soldiers, British, American, and Canadian, are heading toward the shores of Sicily. They expect to meet fierce resistance. Instead, they find something very different. Italian units are understrength, poorly equipped, and demoralized. German units are present, but far fewer than Allied planners had feared. Reinforcements that could have been rushed to the island are busy elsewhere, guarding Greek beaches, Sardinian airfields, and Balkan passes against an invasion that exists only in Hitler's imagination. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, has begun, and Operation Mincemeat is paying off. Allied forces land along a broad front. On the American side, General George Patton's 7th Army comes ashore in the west. On the British side, General Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army lands in the southeast. They face resistance, but not the kind of concentrated armored punch that could have thrown the invasion back into the sea. German commanders in Italy, like Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, had argued that Sicily was a likely target. But without orders and reinforcements from above, their hands were tied. Hitler's mind was fixed on the Balkans. As the days pass, the pattern becomes clear. The defending forces are too weak, too few, and too scattered. The enemy was looking in the wrong direction when the blow fell. The fall of Sicily sets off a chain reaction far beyond the island itself. In Rome, the loss of the island shatters Benito Mussolini's already fragile authority. The Italian public, exhausted by years of war and hardship, sees Sicily's collapse as proof that the Axis cannot defend Italy. On July 25, 1943, Mussolini is deposed by the fascist Grand Council and arrested. By September, Italy will sign an armistice with the Allies and begin to switch sides in the war. For Hitler, Sicily is no longer just a tactical setback. It is the first crack in the Axis alliance in Europe. Operation Mincemeat did not cause Mussolini's fall on its own, but it made the Allied success in Sicily faster and less costly, accelerating the political collapse that followed. While Allied troops push through Sicilian hills and Italian politics implodes, another giant battle is unfolding far to the east. Kursk. In July 1943, Germany launches a massive armored offensive against the Soviet Union near the city of Kursk, one of the largest tank battles in history. But something crucial happens in mid-July. On July 13th, Adolf Hitler orders the suspension of the Kursk offensive. Part of his reasoning: the need to divert reserves to counter what he still thinks may be a major Allied campaign in the Balkans. He is still under the spell of the deception that started with a corpse off the coast of Spain. By calling off the attack, Hitler gives up the last realistic chance for Germany to seize the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front. From this point on, the Red Army will push west almost continuously. Historians debate how much of this decision was due directly to mincemeat, but the connection is clear. By making Greece and Sardinia look threatened, the operation convinced Hitler he needed his best units ready for rapid redeployment, away from Sicily and away from a decisive push at Kursk. With Sicily in Allied hands by mid-August 1943, something else changes. For the first time since 1941, the Mediterranean becomes safer for Allied shipping. Convoys that once had to detour around the Cape of Good Hope can now take a shorter, more direct route to supply Allied armies in the Middle East and Southern Europe. The strategic value is immense: faster logistics, more fuel and equipment where they are needed, greater flexibility in where and when to apply pressure on the Axis. Again, Operation Mincemeat is one piece of a much larger puzzle, but it is a piece without which the invasion of Sicily might have been bloodier, slower, and far less successful. For decades after the war, the true identity of Major William Martin remained an official secret. He was known only by that false name, both in British records and on the grave in Huelva, where he lay buried. In the 1990s, a British researcher named Roger Morgan followed a paper trail through declassified files. He found references that pointed to one man, Glyndwr Michael. In 1998, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission updated the headstone in Huelva Cemetery. Beneath the original inscription, they added a second line. Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin, R.M. A man who had died alone in a derelict building, poor and unknown, now had his real name acknowledged, and his role in one of the most extraordinary operations of the war publicly recognized. Operation Mincemeat did not belong to one person. Ewan Montague, the naval intelligence officer who turned a crazy idea into a meticulously crafted deception plan. Charles Cholmondeley, the RAF officer whose original Trojan horse concept planted the seed. Bentley Purchase, the coroner who provided the body no one would miss. Lieutenant Norman Jewell, who slid that body into the sea off Spain. Jean Leslie, the 19-year-old secretary whose face became Pam, the fiancée of a man who never lived. For their work, Montague received the OBE. Cholmondeley was made an MBE. Jewell was awarded the American Legion of Merit. John Leslie stayed anonymous for decades, only stepping into the light in the 1990s. And at the center of it all was Glyndwr Michael, who never knew any of this. In the end, Operation Mincemeat did something almost unbelievable. It used the body of a forgotten homeless man to convince Hitler that Greece and Sardinia were the real targets, pull German units away from Sicily, make the Allied landings there faster and less costly, accelerate the fall of Mussolini and Italy's exit from the war, contribute to Hitler's decision to halt the Kursk offensive, help swing the strategic balance in both the Mediterranean and on the Eastern Front. British historian Michael Howard would later call it perhaps the most successful single deception operation of the entire war. It was a victory won not by tanks or bombers, but by imagination, paperwork, and one dead man whose life had seemed to matter to no one. Glyndwr Michael never carried a rifle into battle. He never wore a uniform in life. He died in a warehouse, poisoned and alone. And yet, in death, he played a role that armies could not. Sometimes in war, the sharpest weapon is not a gun, but a story your enemy believes. Operation Mincemeat was that story, and its unlikely main character was a man the world had already forgotten.